Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis Legacy. Sorority secrets of the goddess next door are revealed in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis Legacy in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. In a previous video, I talked about the decline of the craft of comic book writing. And one of the things most people don't understand is that creating comics is a craft. Like a screenwriter, a comic book creator is a craftsperson, and that craftsperson has to develop skills in order to produce a quality product. Now, one of the big problems that has plagued the comic book industry over the last 30 years is that no one is really teaching craft to the next generation of aspiring comic writers and aspiring comic artists, and because people are not developing their craft, they're not really learning what they need in order to produce a quality comic. Now, your problems in the comic book industry started, I believe, back in the late 80s when Marvel Comics went out here and fired Jim Shooter. Now, your Jim Shooter was someone who was definitely focused on craft, and because he focused on craft, Marvel Comics was held to a high standard, and most of the people who worked with your Jim Shooter developed their skills and honed their skills to produce quality comics. And those people included people like the late great Dwayne McDuffie, who went on to found Milestone, and many artists and writers like your Rob Liefelds, your Jim Lees, and your Todd McFarlanes, because they were able to work with the Marvel house style and learn their skills and polish their skills with a seasoned editor like a Jim Shooter and under editors like Mark Gruenwald. Many of those creators were able to develop their skills as related to writing and able to develop their skills as related to creating art that told a story in a very compelling single image that moved from panel to panel. Unfortunately, as the 80s turned into the 90s, there was less focus on craft, and because editorial was focused mostly on trying to sell comics through gimmicks, there wasn't a focus on trying to teach the next generation of writers and artists the craft they would need to tell stories. Now, in order to go out here and effectively learn craft, you have to work with seasoned professionals. And those seasoned professionals, they can teach you where you're going wrong, and they can also teach you things about story models and teach you how to work within a 3-act paradigm in order to effectively tell a story. And that's something a writer needs a foundation in craft in order to tell a compelling story and be able to create the words for an artist to turn into pictures. So these are skills that many of today's comic writers are not honing, or they've learned a lot of bad habits from those who learned bad habits before them, because a lot of creators in the 90s, because they were not taught craft, what has happened to a lot of them is they have adopted their bad habits and turned those bad habits into a standard for the industry. And turning those bad habits, like many of the extreme proportions of the 90s and the extreme forms of storytelling, this is why we have a lot of comics coming out here with extremely weak stories, extremely underdeveloped characters, and art that is just painful to look at, because many of these people did not learn how to hone their skills by learning what to do and what not to do from seasoned professionals in the trade. Because the only way to learn the trade really is to go out here and study the craft. And many people, they didn't learn how to study the craft because many in the comic book industry really closed them off and made an insular environment where they did not let newcomers come in. And the only way for newcomers to come in was through your Comic-Cons, where people spend money to go to the con, spend money to show their art, and spend money to show their stories. And this really kept a lot of talent from coming in, and keeping that talent from coming in to the business to learn the craft has led to a lot of people not be knowing what to do when they go out here and create comics. Now, this lack of teaching craft is one of the big problems with the industry, and to overcompensate, what the industry has been doing over the last couple of years has been trying to recruit those from other parts of publishing to go out here and try to write these kinds of stories in comics. Unfortunately, many of these people, while they have skills as related to your novels and they have skills as related to screenplays, don't really understand the medium of comics, and oftentimes when they come into the medium of comics, their stories are completely off. And the reason why their stories are completely off is because many of these people really did not take the time to learn the craft of comics, and because they didn't learn the craft of comics, they go out here and produce stories that really are uneven, stories that are really poorly structured, and stories where the character development really doesn't come together. So that's a problem that the industry has done, because they'll go out here and they'll try to find a YA author like a Gabby Rivera or a best-selling author like a Brad Meltzer, and they'll try to shoehorn them into the role of a comic book writer. But a comic book writer is a completely different set of skills, and the approach to storytelling is completely different than a novel and completely different than a screenplay. And you have to go out here and train in that story model in order to work in it effectively, and that is something many people really they don't really understand about comics, that you have to train in it and study in it in order to learn the craft so that you can learn the model. And once you learn the model, then you can start applying approaches to storytelling that are effective. And that's one of the problems that has led to so many bad comics, is you have a lot of people, they want to come in and write comics. They think that it's something easy, but no, it is not something easy. I can tell you from personal experience, writing comics is a challenge, and the challenge is making the 3-act paradigm from novels and screenplays fit into a medium where you're working with singular images and using those singular images to move the story forward. And you have to know everything about how to not only just write the scene in a condensed form, you also have to go out here and you have to choose the shots sometimes if you're going out here and wanting to focus on certain things. So it's a whole different skill set, and a lot of people in publishing underestimate this skill set, but it's a major skill set that once you get this craft, you will be able to tell stories in a very compelling way. And the sad part is that we don't have enough people teaching craft out here. We have a lot of people in editorial these days who came out of trade publishing, or they're just absolute rookies, but there's nobody as related to teaching the craft of comics. A lot of veteran comic artists, a lot of veteran comic writers, they're not in editorial, and that's a big problem because those young talents are not getting taught craft the way they need to, and that's something that we really need to, if you really want to save this medium, we really need to start focusing on developing editors who understand the medium of comics, understand the medium of storytelling, and can effectively teach these new creators how to work in the medium. Because one of the things about craft is, like a skilled trade, you have to be taught by seasoned pros, and you work side by side with a seasoned pro, and that's how you learn how to develop and hone your craft. I mean, this is something that is done with chefs all the time. In order to learn how to become a great chef, you don't go to cooking school. You work side by side with the chefs, and you learn their line. You learn, and as you're learning the line as related to the stations for preparing the different stations, you learn the skills on how to make different and unique food meals, and you learn different dishes as you're working the line. That is the process of learning how to become a chef, and the same process is as related to comics. The only way to learn is learning how to work your station in the line. And as you're learning to work your station in the line, you're learning the different techniques on how to put a story together. And as you're learning how to put a story together and you're working with different artists, you're learning how stories work in pictures. And that's how you learn this whole craft. And that's why you need an editor who is focused on craft to go out here and teach you the craft of comics. And again, like screenwriting, comics are a craft, and people need to start seeing the value in that craft, because if we don't really see the value in the craft, the medium may not be able to go on for another generation. So that's a problem that we're having in the whole comic book business. A lot of people think, oh, woke comics are really bad, but no, the woke comics come from a lack of craft and a lack of skill and a lack of people who can teach skill to a new generation of people so that they can learn how to tell a story effectively, how to plot a story. Because what I see with a lot of different of these what they call SJW comics and modern comics is where there is no editorial teaching skills. This is why you get many creators making major mistakes and then sitting there getting angry and complaining about, oh, why is my comic so bad and why do you hate my comic? Well, there's nobody there to teach you the techniques and skills in order to tell a story effectively in pictures and words, and there's nobody there to help you hone your skills so that you don't keep making the same mistakes that people made in the 90s. You really need that person there in editorial who is not just there to just go out here and tell you what you want to hear. You need pushback and feedback so that you can hear what the readers are saying, because the whole thing that sells a comic is craft. And if your craft is on point, you're going to be able to go out here and make a solid comic, and that solid comic is going to leave a good first impression on the reader. Now, if you want to see me make more comic related videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, and my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to pick up some of my positive fiction on the SJS Direct imprint, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, and the books of the Spencerella trilogy, you can find those books on Amazon.com, and my comic, E-Steam No Good Deed, on Amazon for 99 cents on Kindle. And my upcoming comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, will be available soon on Kickstarter. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. If you think you've seen scares, get ready for the horror of the hyena woman.